Good morning. Yeah, please come on up, please. Thank you. Have a seat. Thanks very much. Please feel free to sit anywhere you like. So a very good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the first panel. Today we are going to have 3 panel sessions. This one, the very first one, followed by one after lunch and one before the closing. These 3 different panels will focus on 3 very different themes. Today, this panel, with a very diverse group of stakeholders, we are going to look at climate change. And the panel after lunch will focus very much on the technological advances, how it will impact on the humanitarian landscape. And finally, we will talk about the trends and the challenges in terms of this conference. So without further ado, a very quick introduction of myself before I pass the mic to my very esteemed panelists. My name is May Tan Mullins. I'm the professor in sustainability, and thank you, Elle, for inviting me to be the moderator for this panel. My work on humanitarian assistance actually dated back to the Boxing Day tsunami, where I was on the ground about 6 weeks after the event happened. I was in Krabi and Phuket, and I was also in the Typhoon Yolanda about 3 months after the disaster struck. My research is very much focused on community, resilience, and rehabilitation. So without much further ado, I just want to tell you very quickly about today's panel. The theme of today's session, just give me a moment, I'm getting too old. I'll put on my glasses. Okay, about this session, we will actually explore the challenges posed to the humanitarian community in the face of the ever-evolving climate crisis and the ongoing natural hazards. And we will address how we might strategically future-proof our contingency planning and preparedness measures. We have 4 very esteemed, and apologies, Professor John Barnett couldn't join us today due to some sickness, but we have 4 very esteemed speakers in this panel. We have Lin, who is the founder and the developer of Center for Environment and Community Research in Vietnam. We have Chin as well, who is the assistant professor at the Audencia. Lovely, thank you. Audencia Business School, and she has over a decade of academic and practical expertise in humanitarian crisis and ethics. We have Louis as well, obviously. He's the thematic lead, Climate and Environmental Crisis for IFRC, Asia Pacific Regional Office based in KL, Malaysia, just our neighbor. And last but not least, we have Surya. He is currently the head of the Soldier Development Branch in the Center of Excellence for Soldier Performance. I will pass the mic to the panelists to introduce themselves for about a minute. And after that, we will discuss at about 45 minutes, where I will give each panelist a question to address. And after that, we have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. Before the end of the session, you, as the audience, will get about 15 minutes to discuss and reflect on the topic, and then you get to post it on Pigeonhole as well in terms of your further thoughts, comments, or if you have any more questions. Without further ado, I will pass the mic to Lin. Very quickly, just 1 minute, tell us who you are and what's your work about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Lin Nguyen, and I'm from Vietnam. I'm food chemical and environmental engineer by training. 15 years ago, I founded Center for Environmental and Community Research, a local NGO in Vietnam. Our work focuses on policy advocacy for law on water pollution control, community and gender empowerment in protection of our water, our ocean, and environment. In the regard for climate actions, we developed and implement sustainable community models where we provide training and practices to local leaders and people at local level for protection of local waters, local rivers, and disaster preparedness. We support local government to implement all these models. So that's my work.
Thank you, Lin. Chin, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today. So My interest for humanitarianism and humanitarian action stemmed from when I was still a master's student, basically. So I've always been intrigued by how we can further protect the rights of those most vulnerable, the most affected. So last year, I actually published a book on the humanitarian exit dilemma, the moral cost of withdrawing aid. So basically, it address the kind of humanitarian organization's dilemma when they have to try to balance whether there's need that they have to remain engaged with the local communities, but at the same time they also were kind of forced to pull out at one point how to kind of address this kind of dilemma and what are the ethical concerns at stake. So that was really interesting. So my current project is with Audencia Business School, where I'm currently an assistant professor. It was working on exactly the private sector's engagement in disaster relief. What is the role of private sector in helping out when we see that the disaster has been evolving all the way from this kind of intrastate conflicts with all this exacerbated conflicts that we see caused by the climate emergency as well. So that's my current research project and why I'm so interested in humanitarianism. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chin. Surya, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invite. I am Surya, and as my appointment suggests, I head the Social Development Branch in CESP for short. I'm a medical doctor by training, a family physician, and a sports medicine specialist. And in my daily work, I deal with soldier performance enhancement, physiology, nutrition, injury management, and pertaining to today's panel discussion, heat injury prevention and management. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Last but not least, Luis.
Okay, so good morning. I'm Luis Rodriguez, and as you mentioned, I lead the Climate and Environmental Crisis Team of IFRC for Asia Pacific. So basically, we cover 38 countries from Afghanistan to Kiribati. Before joining IFRC 2 years ago, I made a whole career within the UN system, but also I was part of high-level international organizations and also research agencies. So I met someone who I co-supervised the PhD dissertation of, or I was member of the panel. Someone raised his hand there. So thank you for the opportunity to come here and have a view of what you are also doing, and exchange our lessons and experiences in this region and globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis. So we'll just go straight into the panel discussion. I have a couple of questions for the panelists. I'll start off with Lynn in terms of asking about coordination and stakeholder engagement. So the question is about Typhoon Yagi, which is one of the most powerful typhoon that hit Asia this year, which has inflicted unprecedented havoc in Vietnam just last month. So from your experience of advocating for policy change in Vietnam, what are some of the key lessons that the humanitarian community can learn in terms of coordination and stakeholder engagement to better prepare for climate-related crises? Give it away, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. But first let me summarize the impact of Typhoon Yagi in Vietnam. 3 days before landfall of Yagi on September 4th, the government already issued warning to the whole country and all parties prepare for the typhoon. 7 provinces closed schools, including universities, and people reinforced their homes. Coastal areas restricted fishermen from going to sea, and some railways and airports was prepared for potential closure. Food supplies were stocked for 5 to 10 days, and military forces at provincial and national levels were ready to respond. Even football match between Thailand and Vietnam in Hanoi has been cancelled. On 7 September, the Typhoon Yagi made landfall in Quang Ninh province and swept across the northwest for 15 hours, followed by extreme rains up to 550 millimeters in some areas, spanning over 25 provinces and lasting from 7 to 10 days. The heavy rain caused rivers to rise rapidly, leading to widespread floods and flash floods across multiple provinces. Water level in many rivers in the northern region reached very high record. The typhoon took 282 lives. We still have 83 people missing today after almost 1.5 months, and nearly 2,000 people injured. Over 73,000 houses submerged, and 227 hectares of crops have been submerged and flooded. The economic loss alone was near $3.3 billion. And beyond this staggering loss, economic loss, the emotional toll on our vulnerable people, children, elderly, and all at risk has been profound. Despite extensive early preparation and nationwide relief efforts, with the support from military and multiple agencies, the level of destruction from Typhoon Yagi has shown us several critical lessons. Climate change is showing its face more severely. Natural disasters are becoming bigger and more intense. Despite all the careful planning from the government, agencies, the military, the people, the damage was significant. Flash floods, especially in mountainous areas, have never been such intense, frequent, and widespread before. In some areas, the landslides buried whole village. Vietnam is a country prone to natural disasters, so we know how to prepare, and we have experiences in responding to disasters. However, Typhoon Yagi has revealed some gaps in many areas. Our infrastructure is weak and is not built to withstand this storm of such strength. Housing, infrastructure, transportation system have suffered several impacts. So investing in climate resilience infrastructure is extremely important. Early warning systems for natural disasters are crucial. For Typhoon Yagi, we had early warning about the storm, but the warning about rain, about floods, about flash floods, and landslides were not clear, not specific, even not mentioned. The limited effectiveness of our response coordination that limited our efforts in response, coordination, and decision making. Flash floods and landslides also highlights the need to develop risk and landslides maps at village and commune levels. These maps would help raise public awareness and enable early evacuation plan and support effective settlement planning. Enhancing leadership at the local level and building the capacity for communities to make independent, sound decisions are very important. Clear and timely communication is also vital. Although Vietnam has communication system reaching to the grassroots levels, in remote areas, the system is still very weak and easily disrupted. In addition, let us not overlook the critical role of local knowledge and capacities. Communities have a unique understanding of their environment, their insights, and can greatly inform our preparedness efforts. Let me share with you a story about Khao Vang village in Lao Cai, one of the areas most severely affected by flash floods and landslides. This village has 117 people. 2 days after the storm, the rain cut off all communications. They were isolated totally. The village leader, an ethnic minority, noticed a crack in the land. And he said, okay, we have to evacuate all people to the higher ground. So he took all 117 people, evacuated to the mountain about 1 kilometer further from the village. When the flood water came, no one can find villagers. And all have been reported that the entire village has been swept away. Few days later, all villagers have been found in mountains, all safe. For us as a community level, the Center for Environment Community Research, we have been implementing sustainable community models that focus on environmental protection and climate adaptations. We think that we will improve our training programs, adding skills like problem solving, scenario planning, and incorporating local practices and indigenous lessons to build leadership, enhance resilience, and foster community-led solution for disaster response. The upcoming COP29 in Baku will include many discussions on international cooperation to implement the Paris Agreement, including climate change adaptation and mobilizing resources. Funding for climate adaptation in vulnerable countries like Vietnam or Philippines, that today's Chami storm, landed in Vietnam, and right now, the whole province of Quang Ninh is under flood, and the flood was up to the roofs of the houses. We think that the lessons from Typhoon Yagi, from Typhoon Chami today is very clear. Funded to these countries to implement these lessons are crucial. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. I think Lynn comes from a very passionate viewpoint because she's working very closely with the communities on the ground. She has seen how villages actually manage to escape, and those very sadly who don't. And a lot of her points actually resonates with me and my experience in Typhoon Yolanda as well, in terms of the need for very clear communications, the need to really mobilize the local community. But I think what's really important here is about critical infrastructure, because when a typhoon like that hits, right, your power lines are out, then how are you going to have that line of telecommunications or even just charging your handphone, very simple things to be able to work during the post-event, the immediate post-event period. So thank you, Lynn. We'll come back to climate resilience infrastructure. I think that's really interesting. So very quickly, moving on to Chin. Chin, you mentioned that you contributed to the project just now in terms of exploring the ethical implications of managed retreat. So my question for you very quickly is that could you share your perspective on how humanitarian actors can ethically is the key word, balance the need for climate adaptation measures like relocation with the rights of affected community? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here at the 2024 Humanitarian Futures Forum in Singapore today. We are gathering at a pivotal time in history as we see the world's humanitarian challenges are shifting in response to climate emergency. So over the past decades, I don't even need to describe it in length. We have seen an increase in numbers of disasters caused by climate change. So ranging from hurricanes, floods, droughts, and heat waves to rising sea levels. So this disaster lead to food insecurity exactly, and food insecurity then lead to the erosion of livelihoods, which together cause to the eventual worsening of vulnerabilities of the affected people. Particularly, this crisis hit areas with weaker governance and lower economic development the worst. While climate change affects all of us, its impacts are especially severe on the communities concentrated in the global south. And these communities are often the one bearing the consequences of climate change, but are the least responsible for the emissions causing the crisis. So this disproportionate impact poses one of the greatest ethical challenges of our time. So today, I want to focus on a particularly pressing issue, that is, how to balance the need to pursue the so-called collective interests, such as public welfare, long-term city planning, and public good, with the rights and welfare of the communities most affected by climate change. And how do we ensure that while planning for large-scale solutions, we do not neglect the people whose lives are severely affected by these decisions, our decisions? So one of the key strategies in response to climate risks is managed retreat. So unlike the concept of climate migrations, which is usually and often unplanned, reactive, and results from socioeconomic pressures, managed retreat involve deliberate planning and also organized relocation of population driven by state policy due to climate risks. Although managed retreat is more strategic in this sense, several ethical dilemmas remain. For example, how do we respect the rights of those being relocated? And also, how do we ensure that their dignity is being upheld throughout the process? And finally, how do we ensure that we avoid creating new vulnerabilities while we are trying our best to address the already existing old ones? So today I would like to highlight 5 key principles here, which I hope that are able to provide ethical guidelines for our approach to managed retreat, particularly as it relates to balancing collective interest and individual rights. First, we must respect the dignity and autonomy of vulnerable communities. Relocation should not be forced upon people without their active participation. Communities need to have a say. They need to be involved in the decisions that affect their future. This ensures that managed retreat is not a new form of displacement, but a collaborative effort, collaborative process based on consent. However, it's important to recognize and acknowledge its complexity here. Some communities, even in dangerous areas, resist relocating due to mistrust or due to their ties to the land. And this creates a difficult tension here. For example, how do we respect their choices while trying our best to protect them from harm? Humanitarian organizations often face this dilemma, and there are no easy answers. Second, we must ensure that managed retreat follow the principle of doing no harm. This is one of the key pillars a lot of humanitarian organizations follow these days, the concept of doing no harm. While relocation may seem like a solution, it can create new problems, such as loss of livelihoods, dislocating culture, and social disruption. More importantly, vulnerable groups, for example, women, the elderly, the minorities, the children, and those with disabilities are often the ones who suffer from these disruptions the most. In addition, managed retreat could deepen inequality, and it could further exacerbate the existing injustice if the communities being relocated do not have equal access to various forms of resources such as job opportunities, housing, healthcare, and different kinds of services. So relocation really should only happen if it improves the well-being of those affected. If the process makes people worse off, we must reconsider whether relocation, whether many retreat, is the right course of action. Third, cultural identity and social structure need to be weighed in and evaluated carefully. For many communities, their connection, their ties to the land goes beyond the physical. It is tied to their history, their traditions, and also their identities. Relocation risks disrupting these ties, which can lead to, as I mentioned before, cultural loss, social fragmentation, and finally, psychological distress of the people being relocated. So humanitarian organizations, together with the state governments, they need to engage with the local population to ensure that relocation do not erode the cultural heritage. The benefits of physical safety must be weighed carefully against the potential loss of cultural identity and community cohesion. Fourth, we must recognize the competing interests of various actors involved in the process of managed retreat, before the retreat, during the retreat, and after the managed retreat. Government, regional authorities, humanitarian organizations, and local communities may have different interests, different preferences, and different priorities. Governments may focus on land use, economic development, and the broader collective benefits, while humanitarian organizations tend to prioritize the well-being of the affected populations. However, I would really like to stress here that the welfare of the people being relocated must remain our central concern. The interests of vulnerable communities must take precedence over states' broader political or economic interests. The goal should be to protect and empower these communities rather than further marginalize them. Finally, any relocation plan must be practical and effective. We must strive for cost-effective solutions, but not at the expense of vulnerable communities' well-being. If the decision is made to relocate, the process must maximize benefits while minimizing harm to ensure that the resources spent lead to meaningful improvements in people's situations. So earlier, as Christopher mentioned, at the heart of humanitarianism is our shared humanity, be they standing in solidarity with those affected, protecting life, alleviating suffering, reducing harm, and preserving dignity. The climate emergency, the climate crisis, is testing all these values in an unprecedented way. And our response to managed retreat is just one example of this challenge. As we look toward to the humanitarian future, we must reaffirm our commitment to both collective interest, the public welfare, but at the same time, the rights of the affected populations. We need to be sure that the solution we pursue on a large scale do not come at the cost of the most vulnerable. Instead, we must be guided. Our work, our action must be guided by a deep respect and a genuine consideration, genuine commitment for human rights, for dignity, cultural identity, and justice. So today I have outlined 5 ethical principles here: respect for dignity and autonomy, following the principle of doing no harm, preserving cultural identity, balancing potentially conflicting interests of various actors, and finally ensuring practicality. I hope these guidelines can help us navigate complex decisions, and each of these guidelines plays a crucial role in guiding humanitarian action in the face of climate emergency. So finally, I would like to stress that managed retreat is not an easy solution. It involves loss of home, loss of land, and loss of identity. But with a principles right-based approach, we can try to ensure that it is done in a way that respects the humanity, the human rights, and also the dignity of vulnerable communities. Let us continue to work together to build a future that is not just resilient and sustainable, but at the same time, just and compassionate. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Chin, for a very comprehensive reflection on her 5 points of managed retreat. I've personally worked with people who have been relocated from hydropower dams, and a lot of the issues we're seeing here is very similar across different contexts, different locations, different countries. And having a set of guidelines clearly stipulated, what we really need to look out for is quite important in today's context of humanitarian work. One thing that I really took away is the word balance. I guess that's what all our work here is trying to achieve, is to have that balance between the big, the macro versus the micro, the individuals. How do we scale up, but at the same time not forgetting those individuals that they're very much impacted. They are the people who are actually impacted by these actions that we are imposing. So thank you very much. I would like to remind colleagues here that we have the pigeonhole, so please feel free to scan and input your questions, and I will bring them up later during our Q&A session. I'm just going to very quickly move to Louis first before ending with Surya. So Louis, the IFRC have been at the forefront of addressing the humanitarian impacts of climate change. I'm just going to ask you, the very important keyword here is lessons. What lessons have emerged from your work in the region that could inform global climate resilience strategies? Louis, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. So yes, IFRC considers climate crisis as one of our top 5 priorities in our 2030 strategy. So we recognize that climate change is a risk magnifier. As was mentioned before, it increases the frequency and intensity of extreme events, exacerbate humanitarian and development challenges, and in practical terms is aggravating hunger, poverty, threatening health, disrupting education, but also most important thing is impacting the most vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. So most of the global population at risk of climate hazard is in this region, is in Asia Pacific. So this is a combination of population density, a big, massive countries here, and density and exposure. So the perspective for the future are not necessarily optimistic. For instance, depending on the different models and assumptions, over 70% of the global incremental cases of dengue will be in Asia Pacific. This is partially driven by the change in the distribution of the vectors. However, the figures for other hazards such as floods and heat waves are also higher in this region. So basically, a person living in Asia Pacific is 6 times more likely to be affected by disaster events by someone living in other regions. For IFRC, this is a reminder of the need to work together to increase the urgency and ambition of our climate action. As I mentioned before, we cover in this region 38 countries. As I mentioned, from Afghanistan all the way to Kiribati. These countries and their national societies, what does it mean? Our Red Cross and our Red Crescent societies are very heterogeneous in terms of their needs, priorities, and capacities. As an example of something that is positive and replicable, last November, our Asia Pacific National Society, in one of our statutory meetings, signed the Hanoi Call for Action. So what does it mean? It's a joint commitment to work together, national societies and partners, in 5 interlinked pillars to make the humanitarian agencies, our humanitarian agencies, become climate ready. So what does it mean is what we are doing today. So we are investing in strengthening leadership of our national societies, leadership in climate action. We know that it needs a lot of direction, motivation, commitment, but also in many cases we need strong leaders that could be able to promote organizational change. So our leaders are part of what we call the Climate Champions program, and they are the one regularly attending the COP. Last year was Cook Islands, Samoa. This year will be Maldives, for instance. But having leadership is not only enough. No, we have to have clarity and what is in scope and what is out of scope, keep focus, and create country ownerships. So having their own climate strategies and plans are needed. We are working with them to develop their own strategies and plans that will allow them to have programmatic work and not only be responsive. But something important is that we have our disaster law team working with the national societies in this auxiliary role to the government to influence and contribute to the preparation and revise of national strategies, plans, legislation on climate and disaster risk reduction. So a third area of work that was identified by the national societies themselves, and we are working and supporting extensively, is building capacity. But building capacity not only within our Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, but also with our government partners and other humanitarian agencies. We know that there is available information, but we need to have the most effective way to promote information sharing, having critical mass of practitioners, and this involves building and strengthening communities of practices. Depending on the topic, basically we are reaching 22 to 24 of our national societies with capacity building to increase their preparedness and response to work in many sectoral aspects that we could maybe explore. Why 22 and 24? Because as I mentioned here, this is a very heterogeneous region. So we know that there are some countries where their national societies have enough capacity themselves. So we keep our efforts in these 22 or 24. Coordination is essential, and this is something that we are trying to encourage. So we recognize that climate change has cross-sectoral and transboundary impacts. So how we pass from national societies that have a strong coordination role, let's say with disaster risk reduction or disaster risk management agencies, to go and coordinate with other government ministries and agencies like the Ministry of Health, Water, Agriculture, but also with new partners that were out of the original humanitarian scope, no? And also with intergovernmental bodies like ASEAN. So in Asia Pacific, IFRC hosts and facilitates over 20 of these coordination platforms, many of them involving relations between the national societies and their governments. However, most of these could not progress unless we could have enough resources. So climate finance and the financial procedures that are required by new donors are essential. To basically increase our ambition, we need extra support. We have a strong resource mobilization efforts from multiple sources, not only from the humanitarian, that we know that there are changes and shifting, but also expanding into multilateral, private sector, alternative sources like carbon. And globally, we have the Global Climate Resilience Platform to coordinate our resource mobilization efforts. So why the Hanoi Call for Action? Because it's grounded in the needs of the countries and the national societies to strengthen their humanitarian agencies. It's fully endorsed, and something important is that we are Asia Pacific, but Middle East and North Africa have also signed this, so it could be replicated elsewhere. As I mentioned, the importance of what is in and what is out of scope is essential. So at this region, we prepare our regional strategy for climate and environmental crisis. IFRC does not have a global one. We have a global mandate, a general strategy, but there is no climate strategy. We made our climate strategy here, no? And aligned with that, we prepare our climate and health and our climate and displacement. Why? Our MSF colleague mentioned we need to understand how we are going to work in these increasing and emerging problems. No, as we say, climate and health is a humanitarian problem. We know the impacts of heat waves. We recognize the impacts of emerging diseases. We know how climate and disaster is affecting the resilience of health systems. So we need to have a proper climate and health strategy to guide later our programmatic work and our resource mobilization efforts and our capacity building needs. So what can we underline? That having this strategic and programmatic work allow us to reach last year 10.6 million people with climate action. And basically, we are duplicating the size of our climate portfolio, and we are expecting to have also around 30 extra million for climate action related to health in the coming months. So why is important? Because after having this regional strategy, all the regions start building a similar one, that basically guide the way that they might have the climate work in their respective contexts. So what we do here, so we are organized across two pillars of work. On one hand, we're focused on prepare and respond to our urgent and ambitious work in the communities with locally led adaptation, with cross-sectoral approaches, recognizing these interactions between climate and health, climate and displacement, nature-based solutions. But also we need to underline that we have a role to play in terms of greenhouse gas mitigation and reduce our own environmental impact. And something that is our core, people-centered early warning systems and community resilience. This is the work that we do in the field, urgent now. But on the other hand, we have to promote systems transformation. We have to influence policy, legislation, regulatory framework, and also having our key advocacy messages at the right audience through stronger climate diplomacy efforts. This is what we are doing in our second pillar. Yeah. And of course, we are having interlinks between these. So our impacts in the field and our evidence base is guiding the preparation of new policies, but also we have policies and legislation that facilitate and accelerate our work in the field.
Yeah, Luis, can you wrap up, please?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So just 2 points here. So anticipatory action and legislation, there are 2 points that we can do, that we can scale up. In this region, we cover 24 countries to respond to 10 different hazards, as we mentioned. But what is important to underline here, that in this region, we work together with our disaster law team in order that we could have effective legal frameworks and policies to start anticipatory action in the country, start institutionalization, and have a strong political commitment and implementation. So this is part now of the work that globally we are doing with other organizations as the Early Warning for All. It's a global mandate to cover everyone with an early warning system by 2027. And our work in nature-based solution is also replicated. We started working on this in 1994 in Vietnam. We are scaling up our operations in this topic. What is important to say that we are now counting carbon. We know that in our work in Vietnam, there are around $200 million of carbon credits, potential carbon credits, and these experiences in Vietnam and in other countries in the region, like Philippines, is now influencing the work of IFRC in nature-based solutions through our global climate resilience program, but also informing the design of carbon projects to mobilize resources from alternative sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. There's a lot of work to cover there. Yeah, you can see he's very passionate, and sorry we don't have enough time to cover the comprehensive good work of the IFRC. One thing that came away for me is really the different multi-level as well, the multi-stakeholders, going from at the national and then trying to work with the individuals down to the different contexts. That's quite important. You mentioned the word resources. Let's come back to that later, because I think resource is quite an important word here in terms of the work that we're doing. Cautious, because of the time, so I'm just going very quickly past to Surya. In terms of, given your work and publication on heat injury management, which is very climate related, how do you foresee climate change affecting the military's role in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, especially in extreme heat conditions? Take it away, please, Surya.
Right. See, I've got 5 seconds to wrap it all up. So my table, we were just
So you have 8 minutes, it's fine, yes.
we were just commenting at my table that my talk would be better received if we were all in a warmer room and we were all sweating instead of, being somewhere that's really cold. So yes, it will affect humanitarian efforts. Increased heat causes increased heat stress, and the heat stress can manifest as heat injury. Now, heat injury is a spectrum. It can be something very mild and result in common symptoms like headache, irritability, general fatigue, symptoms that you and I may feel on a day-to-day basis. But it can also be very severe. It can result in heat exhaustion. It can result in heat stroke, leading to organ failure, multi-organ failure, and ultimately death. So the logical next question is, what can we do? We as in the SAF, we use the Swiss cheese model as our approach to heat injury management. We look at these 4 main pillars or 4 main slices of cheese: hazard reduction, risk mitigation, early detection, and effective treatment. If I may just give you a few examples for each. Firstly, hazard reduction. How do we reduce the hazard for the humanitarian personnel going into theatre? Heat acclimatization. I don't think that phrase or those words are new to anyone in this room. Heat acclimatization is very effective in reducing the amount of heat stress that an individual undergoes when they are in theatre. And the amount of heat acclimatization that you do depends on the nature of work that you're going to embark upon. If you're going to do moderate to high intensity work, you're going to go out there and start building stuff, right? Then you want to make sure that you are very well heat acclimatized. Whereas if you're just going out there and doing more administrative work, but still exposed to high heat, but you come from a temperate environment, then you just want to graduate the response and make sure that the first day in theatre, you're exposed for an hour, for example. On the second day, you bump it up to 2 hours. On the third day, 3 hours, and so on and so forth. In fact, this is exactly what the Ministry of Manpower practices here for construction workers when they come in or when they come from temperate countries. We have Chinese nationals, when they go back for holidays, Chinese New Year, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then when they come back, we know that they've lost their heat acclimatization and they undergo this 1, 2, 3 hours package. Risk mitigation, moving on to risk mitigation. When you're in theatre, what can you do? To sum it up, cool. You have to cool the individual, right? You have to bring down the core temperature. And how do you cool? There are many ways of cooling, right? One way is ensure that there's a work-rest cycle. This work-rest cycle doesn't just mean that you sleep 7 to 8 hours every night. You ensure that they get comfortable and good quality sleep. But during the work itself, right? Depending on what the temperatures are, how long can they work before they need to have a rest? Is it 45 minutes of work followed by 15 minutes of rest? When it's even hotter, it could be as short as 30 minutes of work followed by 30 minutes of rest. That's a 1:1 ratio there. So these are some of the tools that we use to mitigate the risk of heat. Moving on to early detection. 2 main pillars of early detection. One is education. If you don't know heat injury exists, you ain't going to go looking for it, and you won't know it when it's staring at you in the face. So we need to educate people who are going into theatre that, hey, there is this thing called heat injury. These are the signs and symptoms, and this is what you got to look out for. This is how people will present, and then this is how you manage. Technology for early detection. I'm sure at least 75% of this room is currently wearing a form of a smartwatch that's picking up your heart rate at this very second, right? So we have to leverage on such wearables to give us some of these indices, some of these parameters that shows that, hey, some of our people may be at risk They need to get cooled down. They need to be pulled back, and we need to treat them instead of waiting till they manifest with signs and symptoms. Moving on to effective treatment, the gold standard for treating someone with heat injury universally is cold water immersion. Dunking them in a tub of cold water, 0 to 10 degrees, to cool them down. That's the fastest way you're going to cool anybody down. But we all know that water, in terms of supply and in terms of how clean it is, may be an issue in theatre. So you do have to explore other means of cooling, right? It can be something as simple as ice packs, or over the past few years, a lot of companies have come up with cooling pads, these specific devices that you can refrigerate, and then thereafter they stay cool for a considerable period of time. And they in fact worked more effectively than ice packs. They have better cooling rates, better heat transfer. They suck the heat out from the body much faster than just ice packs. These are things that we might want to consider putting into our standard logistics list whenever we deploy into theatre. So I'll summarize here by saying that you can look at this as applying the principles of providing first aid, right? First aid starts off with DRABC, danger, check for response, airway, breathing, circulation. The danger here that we're talking about is the climate, is the environment, is the heat. You have to address the D first before you can move on to RABC. Likewise, you have to address the danger that the heat is going to put on these individuals who are going into an environment that they may not be acclimatized to. If not, these very same people are going to they're going there to help. These very same people may become the victims. And in the keynote address earlier, it was mentioned that there's a heat lab that's being set up in Singapore. This heat lab, I believe what was being referred to is the Heat Resilience and Performance Center, HRPC for short. It's an entity that is co-funded by MINDEF. And as the name suggests, our outlook on dealing with this issue of heat shouldn't just be about trying to survive. It should be about being resilient and performing in it, because we are going there to provide assistance, to provide aid, to provide help. We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to go into theatre, and we need to be able to perform. And I think I strongly believe that is the aim and the outlook that we should have when we tackle this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Very practical information and advice in terms of how to deal with the heat and exhaustion. So now we are moving into the Q&A session. As you can see, that's the Pigeonhole screen scan code. Please scan and post your question in there. While you're doing that, I have a question for Surya, actually, because just now you mentioned education is very important. And one thing I realized about heat stroke is that you never quite know it's coming until it came. You never quite know that you are suffering from heat stroke until you're lying on the floor, you couldn't breathe, and So are there like symptoms that we could actually pick out that somebody is suffering from heat stroke or going to suffer from heat stroke?
There is a challenge there, because the symptoms and signs of heat injury are quite ubiquitous. They present, or they can present like a very general or any other kind of a disease or condition. One of the hallmarks of heat stroke, when we classify someone as having a heat stroke, is the alteration of their mental status. The moment someone is not quite there, they're not alert. And we use time, place, and person as a very quick screen to tell if someone is alert, right? Do they know what time of the day it is? Do they know where they are? And do they know who they are? Can they even tell their own name? Once you pick up someone as not being able to answer any of these questions, because you would think someone who's alert should very clearly know the answers to these three questions, then your suspicion should go up through the roof. And to me, you should treat that individual as someone who's having a heat stroke until proven otherwise. And so in the SAF, the SOP is the thermometer comes out immediately check, right? And if I may quickly add, one of the red herrings or one of the signs that people use and mistaken as to point towards someone not having a heat injury is cold and clammy skin. The misunderstanding, the common misunderstanding is that someone who's having a heat stroke is going to feel very hot. They're going to be hot to touch. They're going to be perspiring. They're going to be sweating buckets. But when they've advanced to a heat stroke, a lot of systems have shut down. The blood no longer gets to the skin. If the blood doesn't get to the skin, you're not able to sweat. You're not going to feel warm. You're going to feel cold and clammy, in fact. So just because someone feels cold and clammy doesn't mean they're not suffering from a heat stroke. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Surya, for your very practical advice that we will all take away and prevent ourselves from getting heat stroke in this increasingly hot environment. So very quickly, I'm just going to start the very first question. Thank you for all your votes and questions. Just now I mentioned the very, very important word resources, and there we go. The very first questions is that what more should donor be doing to drive climate action, to integrate climate thinking for practitioner in the humanitarian space? I'm going to open it up. Any one of you would like to take this question?
So maybe the person who asked the question could define climate thinking action first.
Yeah, I was asked this question once before. In fact, I was at one of the RSIS event workshop where one of the, I think it was OCHA, is that right? That the professor from OCHA actually talked about how could he integrate, climate sustainability in terms of carbon emission into this whole operation. And I guess there's multiple angle we can tackle, right, in terms of this question is that, first, as an organization, how do we operate in such a way that we are actually, in terms of climate conscious, in terms of our carbon footprint, carbon emission, etc. The other way then obviously is in the way that we come up with strategies. For example, IFRC, your work is very good in terms of coming up with climate resilience strategies for trying to cope with the increasing climate environment. So my take, can I just jump in before we move in? I think the donors should donate more money, basically, right? Because without more funding and resources, it's very difficult for us to focus on climate or coming up with more strategies to deal with climate changes, etc. So that's my take. Any one of you would like to add?
So the point is that the donor will not focus necessarily in the climate action for practitioners. They will focus on people on the ground, so the beneficiaries. So basically is basically how can they provide the resources to the humanitarian agencies or to development agencies or any agency, to reach people on the ground, and move our big numbers and our big targets. So then the question is how can we, within the organization, within our humanitarian organization, mainstream climate thinking into that? What we do, as I mentioned, is having this strategic work within the national societies to define what is in, what is out of scope, and how to do things. Because what we are trying to promote in many cases, is to have, on one hand, our response, but on the other have all the work that is in anticipation and focus more on our locally led, people-centered approaches to increase the capacity of these agencies and the capacity of people on the ground to prepare and respond to the emerging hazards associated to climate change.
Jean, please.
Yeah, thank you. To follow up May's comment, the question just disappeared. But yeah, about the donors one. So I think there's two type of thing that we should look at. First of all, are we talking about individual donors or large-scale governmental donors or private sector donors? I think all in all, just like what I mentioned in my speech earlier, it was also that in my viewpoint, it's less of how the donors try to push the practitioners in focusing more on the action. It's actually most of the organization, as far as I know, they already have this kind of awareness in them. It's more about the donors try to reduce their influence through the earmarked funding about specific project they want to fund, and then try to use their political influence, try to kind of like direct where the funding should go in which project. I think that is the main issue here.
Okay.
It's not really about how they can prompt the practitioners to do more in terms of climate action. From what I understand, at least in the case of MSF, the donors always have different kind of preference, either because of geopolitical issue or their own personal interest. They always earmark funding for particular disaster, etc. I think this problem is really about how they can try to reduce this kind of earmark funding and fund more in the general funding for them to use the fund in a more flexible way to the most needed areas.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have over 20 to 25 questions, so I'm just going to run through them very quickly. The next one I think is very interesting for the audience as well as the panel is how can militaries collaborate with other militaries to mitigate and adapt to climate change and their impacts on AHDR? Sorry, Surya, I'm looking at you.
Two words come to mind. One is integration, and the other one is sharing. And having been through these experiences myself, I don't think there's any substitution for integration. We won't know what each other's capacity and capabilities are until we've had a chance to see them up close. Firsthand, and I'm very happy to say that on a regular basis, the SAF embarks on integrated exercises, bilaterals, multilaterals, exercises that are based on HEDR missions, and like I said, having been through those, I've been able to see up close what other militaries are capable of, and how well we can dovetail and work with each other and complement each other. And as the saying goes, become more than just the sum of our parts. And the second part is really sharing. And again, we are very big on that. We don't, for example, all these heat injury mitigation measures, we don't keep it to ourselves. Neither do our neighbors, and neither do militaries in Europe, for example. Everyone's always sharing. And I just recently came back from a conference in US where they openly shared their latest mechanisms and methods to combat heat injuries and train in this rising temperature landscape. So I think those are key. Continued collaboration would go a long way.
Yeah, very good. So collaboration, exchange of knowledge and best practices is probably the way to go. Anyone else would like to take this question? Okay, moving on to the next one. I'm going by votes as well, trying to bring out those that has lots of votes. This is a bit of a tricky one, but I think it is always a challenge for a long time, especially when we talk about global challenges and issues. The question is posed as, isn't the problem that our governance architect at all levels simply isn't up to confronting the humanitarian consequences of the multiple crises the planet is facing? We lack leadership. I don't want this to become a session of UN bashing, please. Thank you very much. But what do you guys think? Do you think we can do more in terms of leadership?
Oh, right. Okay. No, I'm not really like an expert on leadership, but what I'm thinking is that, the government's capacity of governments now is kind of lacking. If you look at policy level and you look at the reality, it's a huge gap. And many things kind of lost in translation. How hard donors and how hard we discuss here, and then when we translate into the implementation, there's a huge gap on how to, and I think the fundamentally for any problem that we need to look as a people, the most vulnerable people, and if we can help these people by any policy formulation or implementation or transactions, it must be, translated into concrete result. And if these people, beneficiaries, can benefit from that, then the policy is right. But now, I think that we are kind of missing in translation of policies. We talk a lot about regulations, we talk about a lot of principles. We agreed upon so many, very kind of high-level principles. But then the question is, how can we implement? How exactly can we do? And the second thing, how can you engage people? The most important is not like government works only. You need to engage stakeholders in such more effective way, to not only understand the issues, but to know how to help there. So sometimes I feel that, we need, even the government, I don't want to insult anybody, but I think we need education, even policymakers, not just communities, to get a consensus on certain issues and go from there, concrete issues. We need kind of collective leadership and actions for local solutions. People need solutions which can help them. So we need to go to local reality, we need to respect, their opinions and go from there. So I think we need really collective actions, having academics, donors and practitioners working together and go from there.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Talk too much.
I think
Yeah.
no, you don't talk too much. I think it's very important. I feel your pain. Okay, I do feel her pain because I always believe policymakers, the intent is good, but when it comes down to operationalizing it and implementing it, that's where it all goes wrong. It's always that case. I've done so many case studies, been so many sites. It's always like that.
Yeah, let me say something. We are talking about financing. Now you talk about carbon financing, and then when we talk about billions of dollars sitting there and cannot deliver, and then we ask question, how can we bring that monies to the real problems, to solve it? How can we get people together, to work on this one? And science, technology, AI and everything. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, don't get me started. One of my pet peeves is to actually track carbon. So you guys come a long way, right? So you want to be friendly to the environment. You buy this carbon offsetting with your flights and things like that. And one of my pet peeves is like, can I track where the money is going? You can't. You can't track. So, I agree with you. There's a lot of pain here, but let's move away from the pain. Let's deal with more interesting about collaboration and what we can do more in terms of helping each other. And ASEAN, especially we're in Asia, in Southeast Asia. So going to this question, what can ASEAN do about this aside just facilitating dialogues? We've been into many dialogues. I would like Chin and Louis to answer this question, please. Thank you.
Let's put this. So with ASEAN, we have a strong relation, IFRC. We have our head of office in Jakarta is the one representing the federation within ASEAN. So what can we do? So let's put a simple example in terms of our early warning and anticipatory action. So we are working in each and every ASEAN country. No. We, within IFRC, is co-leading the Anticipation Hub for Asia Pacific with FAO, and involves other agencies working in this thematic area. So what can we do that we can say is that we can keep working together to recognize what are the emerging trends of our particular work in anticipatory action that responds to the emerging needs of ASEAN countries. Early this year, for instance, ASEAN was hosting, supported by other agencies, the UN agencies, a working group to basically focus on shock responsive social protection. Something that we as IFRC are very interested doing, something that we have certain track record in particular countries, like for instance in Nepal, but something that we can do more. Something that we can do more. We know that for that particular exercise, we know that there were the government representative, and it was one of our partner national societies facilitating the anticipatory action work. So we can keep complementing each other and understand that there are different mechanisms to have these type of approaches, but also recognizing what is the mandate of ASEAN, and what is our role together. So that's it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Luis. Chin?
Thank
Very
you.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when I think of this question, I think it was strongly related to the previous question, actually, about governance, to be honest. I don't think it can be separated. In a sense, I would say that exactly like Wan Lin and yourself mentioned, I think what ASEAN can do about it, aside from their facilitative role, is also about how they can actually, although I think it's more like an ambitious plan, they can show some sort of like possibility to show that while we are dealing with different kind of humanitarian crisis or negative humanitarian consequences that we encounter, what is lacking here is probably not just about leadership. I think that's posing the wrong question. What is lacking is about accountability to deal with the actual negative consequences of this kind of humanitarian disasters. So if ever it's possible, I think ASEAN can aspire itself to be some sort of like association that can inspire other regional kind of like powers to actually think about, instead of like thinking just about what is the leadership or the conventional idea about how to lead the association with the regional power, it's more about how can you have this so-called moral leadership, ethical leadership, to actually dare to take upon this accountability in this kind of like a really challenging humanitarian time of year and time of the era. I think it's what I would say about this.
Okay, very good. Accountability, eh? Surya and Lynn, do you want to add anything else before we close this session of Q&A? Okay, all very good. We have still quite a lot of questions where we didn't manage to answer. But now we'll move. It'd be good that you flash this up so that you can look at the different questions that's been posted. We will move to you now because you've been sitting there and listening to us and probably falling asleep, which is not good. So what we would like you to do is that I will give you 10 minutes. So there's multiple questions. You can use them to, interest you. Turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself if you haven't done so, talk to each other, try to find and address some of the questions, what we have discussed in the panel, any reflections, any comments, any further questions. Then within 10 minutes, you can either send a collective comment or question into the pigeonhole as well, or individually, that's fine, up to you. But this is a session for you to network and know each other, as well as to reflect on what's been discussed during this panel session. And 5 minutes before 12:30, before lunch break, I will bring it back to the panel, 12:25. I will ask each of our panelists to give you 3 keywords to take away from today's session in terms of what we are really trying to advocate from this discussion today. So 10 minutes, please. Take it away.
Thank you, Professor Tan Mullins. And just before you guys leave and discuss on your own, can I just invite Ambassador Ong on stage to present a token of appreciation to the speakers? Thank you, Ambassador Ong, and thank you, speakers, moderators. Thank you so much.